Sometimes survival means making a deal with the devil, and praying you don't burn. New York City, present day. The afternoon light filtered through silk curtains in the bridal suite of the Hart family mansion, but Evelyn Hart saw none of its elegance. She stood frozen before the mirror, her wedding gown of white French lace hanging on her frame like a burial shroud. In her trembling hands, she clutched a USB drive that Sophie, her childhood friend and only remaining ally, had pressed into her palm mere minutes ago. "Watch it now, Evie," Sophie had whispered, her face drained of color. "I hacked the security system last night." The video played on Evelyn's laptop, sound turned low. Her father's voice, thick with desperation, "The wedding happens today. Tomorrow morning, it's done. Make it look like an accident. The trust fund transfers to her husband immediately upon her death." Julian's response, smooth and practiced, "I've done this twice before, Noah. I know how to make a young wife's tragic death look natural." "Dear God," Evelyn breathed, the laptop screen blurring before her eyes. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was an execution with witnesses. Welcome back, my loves. Before we continue, please tap the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and share this story with someone who needs it. Also, comment where you're watching from and what time it is. It helps the algorithm know you want more content like this. Alright, let's dive in. Evelyn woke to the smell of antiseptic and leather, her head pounding with the rhythm of her racing heart. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, exposed wooden beams crossing a vaulted space, track lighting casting clinical brightness across white walls. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her shoulder where she'd slammed against the SUV's interior during the drive, and her cut palm throbbed beneath fresh bandaging. "Easy." A woman's voice, cool and measured. "You've been out for 2 hours. Shock, mostly. Some dehydration." Evelyn's vision cleared enough to make out the speaker, Camila, the woman from the driveway. She stood near a medical cabinet, arms crossed, watching Evelyn with the detached interest of someone observing a lab specimen. Her dark auburn hair was still pulled back in that severe ponytail, and in the bright light, Evelyn could see the family resemblance more clearly. The same sharp cheekbones, the same predatory stillness. "Where am I?" Evelyn's voice came out as a rasp. "Cross Estate. Hudson Valley. About 90 minutes north of the city." Camila moved closer, her boots silent on the polished concrete floor. "You're in what we call the medical suite. We keep a fully stocked facility here. Occupational necessity." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's gaze darted around the room, taking in the medical equipment that looked more advanced than most hospital emergency rooms, the locked cabinets that probably held more than standard pharmaceuticals, the reinforced door with a biometric lock. "I need to leave," Evelyn said, though her body protested even the thought of movement. "They'll be looking for me. Julian and my father, they have connections. Police, private security. They won't find you here." The new voice came from the doorway, deep and commanding, and Evelyn's breath caught as Dominic Cross entered the room. He moved with the controlled grace of someone perpetually aware of his surroundings, his presence filling the space in a way that made the medical suite feel suddenly smaller. The black suit he'd worn earlier had been replaced by a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing the edge of what looked like a tattoo on his left wrist. His cold gray eyes swept over her, cataloging every detail with unsettling precision. Behind him came an older man, 50s perhaps, with silver threading through his dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of a college professor rather than what Evelyn suspected he actually was. He carried a laptop and wore an expression of mild curiosity. "Miss Hart." Dominic stopped at the foot of the medical bed, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but radiating controlled menace. "I'm told you have an interesting story. Something about a wedding and a murder plot." Evelyn's throat went dry. "The USB drive, Sophie gave me. We have it." The older man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a hint of academic precision. "Frank Munger. I handle strategic operations for Mr. Cross. I've been reviewing your evidence while you were unconscious." He set the laptop on a nearby table, turning the screen toward her. The security footage was paused on a frame showing her father and Julian in what looked like Noah Hart's study. "Audio and video from your father's home security system. Time-stamped 3 days ago. Very thorough work from your friend." "Then you know," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength from desperation. You know they're trying to kill me. Julian Crane has done this before, married wealthy women, killed them, taken everything. My father sold me to him to clear his gambling debts. The wedding was supposed to be today, and tomorrow I was supposed to die in an accident. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes, calculation, perhaps, or recognition of an opportunity. Why should I believe a woman who stowed away in my vehicle like a common criminal? Because I have $47 million in a trust fund that I can't access until I'm 30, Evelyn said, the words tumbling out. Because Julian Crane is a serial killer who's gotten away with it twice before. Because my own father would rather see me dead than deal with his debts. And because, her voice cracked, because I have nowhere else to go. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Camila watched her brother, Frank adjusted his glasses, and Evelyn realized with sick certainty that her entire future hung on whatever Dominic Cross decided in this moment. Finally, Dominic moved, pulling up a chair and sitting with deliberate slowness. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and infinitely more dangerous than if he'd shouted. Here's what's going to happen, Miss Hart. Frank is going to verify every detail of your story. If you're lying, if this is some elaborate con or if you're working with law enforcement, you won't leave this estate alive. He paused, letting the threat sink in. But if you're telling the truth, then we have something interesting. A legitimate heir to a fortune, running from men who want her dead. That's valuable. That's leverage. I'm not an asset, Evelyn whispered, though she knew that's exactly what she'd become. Dominic's smile was blade-thin. Everyone's an asset, Miss Hart. The question is whether you're worth the investment of keeping you alive. He stood, buttoning his cuffs with precise movements. Frank, I want a complete background check by morning. Camila, get her cleaned up and into guest suite 3. Post guards. And her? Camila asked, gesturing to Evelyn. Dominic paused at the door, glancing back. She stays. For now. Until I decide what she's worth. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with the sister and the strategist, and the terrifying realization that she'd escaped one prison only to find herself in another, this one with walls she couldn't see and a keeper who dealt in currencies she didn't yet understand. Guest Suite 3 turned out to be more luxurious than any hotel Evelyn had ever stayed in, and infinitely more terrifying. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens that stretched toward a tree line in the distance, but the glass was bulletproof. She'd noticed the telltale thickness when Camila had opened the door. The bedroom was all clean lines and expensive neutrals, the kind of understated elegance that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. A connecting bathroom held a walk-in shower with multiple heads and a bathtub deep enough to drown in. The door had no visible lock from the inside. That detail hadn't escaped her notice. Camila had provided clothes, designer jeans that fit perfectly, soft cashmere sweaters, undergarments still in packaging. We keep sizes on hand, she'd said without elaborating, and Evelyn hadn't asked what that meant. She'd showered for nearly an hour, watching rust-colored water swirl down the drain as she scrubbed away the physical evidence of her escape. But no amount of hot water could wash away the memory of her father's voice on that recording, clinical and detached as he discussed her murder. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened before she could respond, and a woman in her 60s entered carrying a tray. She had steel-gray hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp eyes that assessed Evelyn with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades reading people. Breakfast, Miss Hart. She set the tray on the small dining table near the windows. I'm Elena. I manage the household. Thank you. Evelyn approached cautiously, taking in the spread, fresh fruit, pastries that smelled like they'd been baked within the hour, coffee in a silver carafe. This is too much. Mr. Cross insists his guests are properly cared for. Elena's tone suggested this was non-negotiable. Even the ones who arrive uninvited. Evelyn felt her cheeks burn. I didn't mean to. Eat, Miss Hart. You'll need your strength. Elena moved to the windows, adjusting the curtains with practiced efficiency. Mr. Cross runs a tight operation. Everyone here has a role, a place in the hierarchy. You do well to learn it quickly. What's my place? Evelyn asked, pouring coffee with hands that only trembled slightly. Elena turned, and something that might have been sympathy flickered across her face. That depends entirely on what Frank discovers. And what Mr. Cross decides you're worth. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. The guards outside aren't just to keep others out, Miss Hart. They're to keep you in. Don't test them. After Elena left, Evelyn forced herself to eat, though everything tasted like cardboard. Through the windows, she could see men patrolling the grounds, not gardeners, despite their casual clothes. The way they moved, the bulges under their jackets, told a different story. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, waiting for her captors to decide her fate. The television remote sat on the nightstand, and Evelyn turned it on more for the illusion of normalcy than anything else. She flipped through channels mindlessly until a familiar face froze her finger on the button. Julian. He stood behind a podium bristling with microphones, her father beside him, both men wearing expressions of anguished concern that would have been Oscar-worthy if Evelyn didn't know better. The cheerin at the bottom read, "Bride vanishes on wedding day, family fears kidnapping." "Evelyn is a gentle soul," Julian was saying, his voice breaking at precisely the right moment. "She's been under tremendous stress with the wedding preparations. We're worried that someone may have taken advantage of her vulnerable state." Noah stepped forward, and Evelyn's stomach churned as tears, actual tears, streamed down his face. "My daughter suffers from anxiety, depression. She's been on medication for years. If someone has her, if they've convinced her that she's in danger from us." He pressed a hand to his mouth, overcome. "We just want her home safely. Evelyn, sweetheart, if you're watching this, we love you. Whatever you think is happening, we can work through it together." The performance was masterful. Evelyn watched, numb, as a detective from the NYPD stepped up to provide details. Missing person report filed. Extensive search underway. Anyone with information should contact authorities immediately. Julian's connections at work, her father added, had offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to her safe return. They were painting her as mentally unstable, a danger to herself. If she surfaced, claimed they'd tried to kill her, who would believe the paranoid, delusional bride over the concerned fiancé and grieving father? The door opened without warning, and Dominic entered with Frank close behind. Neither man knocked. Dominic's gaze went immediately to the television, taking in the press conference with an expression of mild interest. "Impressive," he said, gesturing for Frank to mute the sound. "They moved faster than I expected." "They're controlling the narrative," Frank added, opening his laptop on the coffee table. "By the time you could tell your story, you'd already be discredited. Mentally unstable runaway bride versus respectable businessman and concerned father." He looked at Evelyn over his glasses. "They're very good at this." "Because Julian's done it before," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. His last wife, Rebecca Ashford, died in a car accident 6 months after their wedding. Her family contested the will, claimed he'd been abusive, but there was no evidence. The case was dismissed. "Not quite dismissed," Frank said, turning the laptop toward her. "Settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. I found the court records buried in 3 different jurisdictions." He pulled up another file. "And the wife before that, Margaret Chin, died from an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. Again, 6 months into the marriage. Again, family accusations of foul play. Again, no charges filed." Dominic moved to the windows, hands in his pockets as he surveyed his domain. "Your friend's timing was impeccable. Another day and you'd have been the 3rd Mrs. Crane to suffer an unfortunate accident. Can you help me?" The words came out before Evelyn could stop them. "You have resources, connections. If Frank found this information, we could go to the police, show them." "The police you're watching on television?" Dominic's tone was almost amused. "The ones currently searching for a mentally unstable kidnapping victim?" "Miss Hart, you're not thinking strategically." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Desperation crept into her voice. "Stay here and hope they don't find me? They have 50,000 reasons for someone to turn me in." Dominic turned from the window, and the look he gave her was predatory and calculating in equal measure. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. Starting with understanding that as of this moment, Evelyn Hart, the frightened bride, the victim, no longer exists." He crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "If you want to survive, you'll need to become something else entirely. Something harder. Something they won't see coming." "And what's that?" Evelyn whispered. His smile was blade-thin and utterly without warmth. "Mine." Frank's investigation took 36 hours. Evelyn spent them pacing the guest suite like a caged animal, watching news coverage that grew increasingly damning with each cycle. By the second day, Julian had appeared on 3 major networks, his performance polished to perfection. Her father had hired a crisis management firm. The reward had doubled to $100,000. They were hunting her with the efficiency of a military operation, and every news anchor in the city was helping them do it. When Dominic finally summoned her to his office on the third morning, Evelyn had barely slept. Elena had brought her another outfit, tailored black trousers and a silk blouse the color of smoke, and she dressed with the numb efficiency of someone preparing for an execution. The guards flanking her door fell into step behind her as she followed Elena through corridors that spoke of old money and new violence. Original artwork hung on walls alongside what looked suspiciously like security monitors disguised as abstract pieces. Dominic's office occupied the entire east wing of the main house. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private lake, but Evelyn's attention was drawn immediately to the war room setup dominating one wall. Multiple screens displayed what looked like financial data, security feeds, and several documents she recognized from her father's study. Frank sat at a conference table covered in files, his laptop open, looking like a professor preparing to defend a dissertation. Camila stood near the windows, arms crossed, watching Evelyn with that same unreadable expression she'd worn since their first meeting. Dominic sat behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, wearing a charcoal suit that made him look every inch the legitimate businessman rather than the criminal overlord she knew him to be. He didn't stand when she entered, just gestured to the chair across from him with the casual authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Sit." Evelyn sat, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Frank," Dominic said, not taking his eyes off her. "Brief her." Frank rose, moving to the screens with the practiced ease of someone who'd given this presentation before. Evelyn Hart, age 26, only child of Noah and Suzanne Hart. Mother died of ovarian cancer when you were 16. Trust fund established by maternal grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, value currently $47.3 million. Inaccessible until your 30th birthday or upon legal marriage, at which point control transfers to your spouse unless specific legal provisions are made otherwise. He clicked to the next screen, showing a photograph of a blonde woman with kind eyes. Rebecca Ashford Crane, deceased. Married Julian Crane 14 months ago. Died in a single vehicle accident 6 months into the marriage. No witnesses, toxicology showed .08 blood alcohol, just at the legal limit. Her family contested the will, claimed coercion and abuse. Settled out of court for $2 million to make the problem disappear. Another photo, an Asian woman with a sharp smile. Margaret Chin Crane, deceased. Married Julian Crane 3 years ago. Died from accidental overdose of prescription sleeping medication. Again, 6 months into marriage. Her brother hired a private investigator who found evidence of Julian having an affair during the marriage, but nothing that proved murder. No charges filed. Julian inherited everything, approximately $11 million. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Seeing the faces of Julian's victims made it visceral in a way the abstract knowledge hadn't been. These were real women who'd trusted him, married him, died because of him. "Now you," Frank continued, pulling up the security footage from the USB drive. Same pattern. Whirlwind courtship, engagement within 3 months, wedding planned quickly. Your father's gambling debts to various loan sharks total $2.3 million. Text messages between Noah Hart and Julian Crane, which I obtained through means that won't hold up in court, show Julian offering to clear those debts in exchange for access to you. The marriage was a business transaction with your murder as the expected outcome. "I already knew all this," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "Why are you telling me again?" "Because you need to understand the legal reality," Dominic said, leaning back in his chair. "If you go to the police with your story, you'll be arrested within hours. Your father and Julian have already established you as mentally unstable. They have a doctor on standby who'll testify you've been treated for paranoid delusions. The USB drive will be dismissed as edited footage, the product of your deteriorating mental state. You'll be involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation, and while you're locked up, Julian will get a court order granting him conservatorship based on your engagement and your obvious need for care." The room tilted slightly. "They can't do that." "They can and they will," Frank said flatly. "I've seen the paperwork. It's already prepared, just waiting for your location to be confirmed." Evelyn looked at Camila, desperate for something other than clinical detachment. "This is insane. There has to be something." "There is," Dominic interrupted, his voice cutting through her panic like a blade. "That's why you're here." He stood, moving around the desk with that same controlled grace that made her nervous system scream warnings. He perched on the edge of the desk directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, smell the expensive cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. I'm going to make you an offer, Miss Hart. One time, non-negotiable, expires in 24 hours. Her mouth went dry. What kind of offer? Marriage. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Legal, binding, ironclad. You become my wife on paper, which immediately transfers legal control of your trust fund to me as your spouse. It also strips your father of any claim to guardianship and makes Julian Crane's entire plan worthless. You can't inherit his estate if you're already married to someone else. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. And what do you get out of this? Access to $47 million in legitimate capital, Dominic said bluntly. Money I can invest in legal businesses, properties, ventures that don't attract federal attention. Your trust fund becomes my laundering operation, perfectly legal and completely untouchable. So I trade one man who wants to kill me for my money for another man who wants to use me for my money. Bitterness leaked into her voice despite her best efforts. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes, not warmth, exactly, but recognition. The difference is that I need you alive. Julian needed you dead. I'd say that's a significant upgrade in your circumstances. What if I say no? Then you walk out that door, and we never had this conversation. He gestured toward the exit. I'll even have Elena pack you a bag with those clothes you're wearing. You'll last maybe 6 hours before someone claims that reward money. Julian will have you committed within 24 hours, and you'll be dead within 6 months, just like Rebecca and Margaret. At least you'll die knowing you had a choice. Evelyn's breath came shallow and fast. This was impossible. Trading one captor for another, one form of control for something potentially worse. But Dominic was right about one thing, he needed her alive. That was more than Julian could say. 24 hours, Dominic continued, standing. You have until tomorrow morning at 8. If you agree, we proceed immediately. Frank has already prepared the documentation. We'll marry in a private ceremony, establish the legal framework, and make you untouchable. If you refuse, you leave and take your chances with the world that's currently hunting you. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Hart. In my world, loyalty is everything. If you agree to this arrangement, you become part of my organization. That means you follow my rules, respect the hierarchy, and understand that betrayal has consequences that make death look merciful. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Evelyn sat in the silence, surrounded by evidence of her impossible situation, and tried to figure out which devil offered the better chance of survival. Evelyn gave her answer at dawn, standing in Dominic's office with the rising sun painting the lake beyond the windows blood red. She'd spent the night weighing impossible choices and had come to a simple conclusion: the devil you could negotiate with was better than the one planning your funeral. I accept. Dominic had simply nodded, as if her capitulation had been inevitable, and set the machinery of his organization into motion. By noon, she stood in a small chapel on the estate grounds, a stone structure that probably predated the main house by a century, all Gothic arches and stained glass that cast jeweled light across worn pews. Frank had produced documents that looked flawlessly legitimate, complete with official seals that Evelyn suspected were anything but legal. A judge arrived, elderly and nervous, who stammered through the ceremony while Camila and Elena served as witnesses. Evelyn wore a simple cream dress Elena had provided, nothing like the elaborate gown that still hung in her father's mansion. No veil this time, no flowers, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a business transaction sealed with legally binding words. Dominic stood beside her in a black suit, his expression as cold and remote as a marble statue. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was no kiss, no embrace, just a brief, clinical handshake and Dominic's quiet, "It's done." The judge left quickly, pocketing an envelope Frank had prepared. The documents were signed, witnessed, and sealed. Evelyn Hart ceased to exist in the eyes of the law. In her place stood Evelyn Cross, wife of Dominic Cross, protected by a marriage certificate that stripped her father and Julian of any legal claim to her person or her fortune. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of a caged door closing. The wedding reception consisted of a silent dinner in the main house dining room, just the two of them at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 20. Servers came and went like ghosts, placing courses before them that Evelyn barely tasted. Dominic ate with mechanical efficiency, checking his phone periodically, his attention clearly elsewhere. "You don't have to pretend this is romantic," Evelyn said finally, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "I know what this is." "Good." Dominic set down his fork with precision. "Then we understand each other." This marriage is a legal instrument, nothing more. You'll have your own suite, your own space. I won't make demands on you beyond what's necessary for appearances. How generous, she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. His eyes met hers, cold and assessing. I could have let Julian have you. Remember that when you're tempted to see me as the villain in your story. Before she could respond, the dining room door opened and one of Dominic's men entered, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his jaw. He leaned close to Dominic, whispered something Evelyn couldn't hear. She watched Dominic's expression shift, a dangerous stillness settling over him like frost. Where? Dominic's voice was quiet, but Evelyn heard the threat beneath it. The warehouse. Marcus has him secured. Dominic stood, buttoning his jacket with movements that were almost meditative. Bring the car around. He looked at Evelyn, and something in his gaze made her stomach clench. You're coming with me. What? Why? Because you're my wife now, and that means you need to understand exactly what that entails. He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back. Consider this your orientation. The drive took 20 minutes, deeper into the Hudson Valley, down increasingly isolated roads until they reached a sprawling industrial complex that looked abandoned from the outside. Inside was a different story, security everywhere, men with weapons who nodded to Dominic with the reverence usually reserved for royalty. They descended into a basement level that smelled of oil and something metallic that Evelyn's brain refused to identify. Camila was already there, along with Frank and several other men Evelyn recognized from the estate. In the center of the concrete floor, tied to a chair under harsh fluorescent lighting, sat a man in his 30s. His face was already bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Dominic, he gasped when he saw them enter. Please, I can explain. Marco tells me you've been providing information to the Calabrese family. Dominic's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. Locations of our shipments, names of our distributors. How long has this been going on? I wasn't. The man's protests dissolved into panicked gasping. They threatened my sister. My niece. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Dominic circled the chair slowly, hands in his pockets. You chose to betray your family. You chose to put everyone in this organization at risk. You chose this outcome. Evelyn's heart hammered as Dominic pulled a gun from his jacket, a sleek black weapon that looked like an extension of his hand. She wanted to look away, wanted to run, but Camila's hand on her arm held her in place. Watch, Camila whispered. This is the world you married into. Dominic, please, the man was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I'll do anything. I know you will. Dominic raised the gun, and the sound of the shot in the enclosed space was deafening. The man slumped forward, blood spreading in a dark pool beneath the chair. Evelyn's ears rang, her vision tunneling as her body tried to process what she'd just witnessed. Dominic had pulled the trigger without hesitation, without emotion, as casually as someone might swat a fly. He turned to face her, the gun still in his hand, and in that moment Evelyn saw him clearly, not the cold businessman, not the calculating strategist, but the predator who ruled through violence and fear. In my world, Dominic said, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears, loyalty is everything. Betrayal is death. There are no second chances, no forgiveness, no mercy. He stepped closer, and Evelyn fought every instinct that screamed at her to run. You're part of this now. You wear my name, you live under my protection, and that means you follow my rules. Do you understand? Evelyn's throat closed around words she couldn't form. She managed a nod, though her entire body was shaking. Good. Dominic handed the gun to one of his men, then looked at Camila. Get her back to the estate. I'll be there in an hour. The drive back was a blur. Evelyn sat in the back seat, staring at her hands, at the simple platinum band on her left ring finger that marked her as Dominic Cross's wife. She'd thought she understood what she was agreeing to. She'd thought she could handle the darkness of his world. But as she closed her eyes, all she could see was the casual efficiency with which Dominic had ended a man's life, and she realized with sickening clarity that she'd bound herself to a monster. The only question now was whether she would survive long enough to regret it. Evelyn didn't sleep that first night. She lay in her new suite, larger than the guest room, with a sitting area and a view of the lake, and stared at the ceiling while her mind replayed the execution on an endless loop. The sound of the gunshot. The casual efficiency. The spreading pool of blood. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She could let the horror paralyze her, could spend whatever time she had left as a victim in a different kind of cage, or she could learn to survive in this world. If she was going to be Dominic Cross's wife, even in name only, she needed to understand the rules of the game. Camila found her in the gym at 6 in the morning, wearing borrowed workout clothes and attempting to work through her terror on a treadmill. Dominic's sister regarded her with that same calculating expression, then moved to the weight rack without a word. Evelyn watched her go through a routine that spoke of years of disciplined training, not the casual fitness of someone who worked out for vanity, but the brutal efficiency of someone who trained for survival. "You're up early," Camila said finally, toweling off. "Most people who witness what you saw last night spend the next day curled up in bed." "I'm not most people." Evelyn stopped the treadmill, her breathing harsh. "And if I'm going to survive here, I need to be stronger than I was." Something shifted in Camila's expression, not quite approval, but close. "Meet me here every morning at 6. Wear clothes you can move in." She headed for the door, then paused. "And Evelyn? Don't mistake survival for acceptance. This world doesn't forgive weakness, but it also doesn't reward blind obedience. You'll need to find the balance." The training began the next morning. Camila was merciless, running Evelyn through drills that left her gasping and bruised. Boxing combinations, grappling techniques, pressure points that could disable an attacker. By the end of the first week, Evelyn's body was a map of emerging bruises, but her hands no longer shook when she thought about the warehouse. "You're thinking too much," Camila said, circling her on the mat. "In a fight, hesitation gets you killed. Your instincts need to be faster than your conscience." She lunged, and Evelyn barely managed to block, twisting away but losing her balance. She hit the mat hard, the air rushing from her lungs. "Again," Camila commanded. Evelyn pushed herself up, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. "Why are you helping me?" Camila's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. "Because my brother made you part of this family, and in our world, family protects itself. But also because I've seen too many women underestimate their own capacity for violence. You survived Julian and your father's plot because you recognized danger and ran. Now you need to learn what to do when running isn't an option." Beyond physical training, Camila became Evelyn's guide to the Byzantine hierarchy of Dominic's organization. Over lunches in Camila's private office, sparse and efficient, dominated by multiple computer screens, she explained the structure. Dominic at the apex, making all final decisions. Frank as his strategist and consigliera, managing the legal and financial operations. Camila as his enforcer and second-in-command, handling security and discipline. Below them, a network of captains who controlled territories, ran operations, and reported directly to the inner circle. "The men respect strength," Camila explained, pulling up organizational charts on her screen. "You're Dominic's wife, which gives you theoretical authority, but you'll need to earn their actual respect. Some will test you. Some will dismiss you as a liability. You'll need to prove you're neither." "How?" "By being useful. By learning the business. By showing you understand the stakes." Camila leaned back in her chair. "And by never, ever showing fear, even when you're terrified." Evelyn began attending Frank's morning briefings, sitting quietly in the corner of Dominic's office while they reviewed operations, shipments, investments, problems that needed solving. Dominic barely acknowledged her presence at first, treating her like a piece of furniture. But she listened, absorbed, began to understand the intricate dance of legitimate business and criminal enterprise. 3 weeks into the marriage, during a discussion about a real estate acquisition in Manhattan, Evelyn spoke up for the first time. "That property has environmental violations from the previous owner," she said, her voice cutting through Frank's presentation. "I saw the disclosure reports when my father was looking at it last year. You'll inherit those liabilities unless the contract specifically indemnifies you." The room went silent. Dominic's gray eyes fixed on her with laser focus. "How do you know this?" "My mother's trust includes commercial real estate. I've been reading property contracts since I was 18. She met his gaze, refusing to look away despite the intensity. "The violations will cost approximately $3 million to remediate. Factor that into your offer price." Frank pulled up the documents, scrolling through pages of dense legal text. "She's right. The environmental clause is buried in Section 12, subsection 4. He looked at Evelyn with new interest. "You caught something I missed." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Anything else we should know?" "The property manager has 2 judgments against him in civil court for misappropriating tenant funds. You'll want someone else managing the building." Evelyn felt her confidence growing. I can review the rest of the contract if you want. Do it. Dominic returned his attention to Frank, dismissing her contribution as easily as he'd acknowledged it, but Evelyn caught the slight nod he gave Camila. Approval, however grudging. That evening, Frank intercepted her in the hallway outside her suite. I need to show you something. He led her to his office, pulling up multiple screens. Julian's getting desperate. The surveillance footage showed Julian meeting with 3 men in tactical gear at what looked like a private airfield. Money changed hands, along with a photograph Evelyn recognized with sick certainty. It was her engagement photo. Private military contractors, Frank said, his voice grim. Former special forces, now working for the highest bidder. Julian's hired them to find you. He's told them you're mentally unstable and dangerous, that you need to be brought back for your own safety. How much is he paying? 200,000. Plus a bonus if they find you within 30 days. Frank pulled up another screen showing Noah Hart at a casino, throwing dice with shaking hands. Your father's debts have increased. The loan sharks are getting impatient. He's telling anyone who'll listen that you've been brainwashed by kidnappers, that you need to be rescued. Evelyn's stomach churned. They're not going to stop. No, Frank agreed. Which means we need to be ready when they find this place. Because they will find it. It's just a matter of time. That night, Evelyn found Dominic in his office, staring out at the dark lake. She'd learned to read his moods in the past weeks, the stillness that meant he was calculating, the tension that meant violence was coming. Frank told me about the mercenaries, she said without preamble. Dominic didn't turn. Did he also tell you that I've increased security, added patrols, established a perimeter defense system? He did. Evelyn moved to stand beside him, close enough to see his reflection in the glass. I want to help. This isn't your world. It is now. She touched the ring on her finger, the platinum band that marked her as his. You made it my world when you married me. So let me be useful. Let me do more than hide behind your walls. Dominic turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even respect. You're not the woman who hid in my SUV. No, Evelyn agreed. I'm not. That woman was a victim. I'm trying to become something else. His smile was slight but genuine, the first real expression she'd seen from him that wasn't calculation or threat. Then we'll see what you're capable of when they come for you. The alarm woke Evelyn at 2 a.m, a low, pulsing sound that sent her heart into her throat. She was on her feet before her conscious mind caught up, the weeks of training with Camila overriding her panic. She grabbed the phone from her nightstand, saw the alert flashing across the screen, perimeter breach. South Gate. Her door burst open before she could reach it. Camila stood in the hallway, dressed in tactical black, a gun in each hand. Stay low. Move fast. Follow me. They ran through corridors Evelyn had memorized during her time here, heading away from the south side of the estate. Behind them, she could hear shouts, the rapid percussion of gunfire, the organized chaos of Dominic's security team responding to the threat. Camila led her to a reinforced safe room near Dominic's office, steel-lined walls, independent air supply, enough supplies to survive a siege for days. Dominic was already there, standing before a bank of monitors showing security feeds from across the property. He wore tactical gear, a bulletproof vest over his dress shirt, and held a rifle with the casual familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. Frank stood beside him, fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. 3 vehicles, Frank reported, his voice tight. They breached the south gate with a Ram vehicle. Estimate 6 to 8 hostiles, military-grade weapons and equipment. Professional operation. Evelyn watched the screens, her stomach nodding as she saw muzzle flashes in the darkness, figures moving with tactical precision through the grounds. Dominic's men were holding the perimeter, forcing the attackers to take cover, but it was clear this wasn't a random assault. This was coordinated, well-funded, exactly what you'd expect from former Special Forces operators. Julian's mercenaries, Evelyn breathed. Yes. Dominic's voice was cold, controlled fury. They're probing our defenses, testing our response time. This isn't a full assault, it's reconnaissance. He keyed his radio. All units, maintain defensive positions. Do not pursue beyond the inner perimeter. I want at least one of them alive for questioning. The firefight lasted 12 minutes. Evelyn watched, transfixed, as Dominic's organization demonstrated why they'd survived in a world where weakness meant death. The mercenaries were good, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned. They retreated in good order, leaving behind 2 wounded men who were quickly secured by Dominic's team. When the all-clear finally sounded, Dominic was already moving. "Frank, I want interrogation teams ready in 10 minutes. Camila, coordinate with security. I want every inch of this property swept for surveillance devices. If they got close enough to probe our defenses, they might have left eyes on us." "What about Evelyn?" Camila asked, holstering her weapons. Dominic's gaze cut to her, and Evelyn saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before: concern, quickly masked. "She stays in the safe room until we've cleared the grounds." "I'm fine," Evelyn said, though her hands were shaking. They didn't get close to the house. This time. Dominic's jaw tightened. This was a message. "They know where you are, and they're letting us know they can reach you whenever they choose." The interrogation of the captured mercenaries took 3 hours. Evelyn wasn't allowed to be present, but she watched from the security feeds in the safe room as Dominic and his men extracted information with methods she tried not to think about too carefully. By dawn, they had names, payment records, and a timeline. Julian had hired a firm called Aegis Security Solutions, a private military company that operated in legal gray zones. The contract specified retrieval of one Evelyn Hart, to be delivered alive and unharmed to Julian Crane's custody. Payment, $250,000, with a $50,000 bonus for completion within 2 weeks. Frank called a meeting in Dominic's office as the sun rose over the lake. Evelyn was summoned along with Camila and 3 of Dominic's senior captains, men whose names she'd learned, whose roles she now understood. They stood around the conference table while Frank displayed his findings. "They'll come again," Frank said, pulling up tactical maps of the estate. "Now that they know our security layout, they'll adapt. More men, better equipment, a different approach. We can fortify, add more patrols, but eventually they'll find a weakness. Then we don't wait for them to find it," one of the captains said. "We take the fight to them." "Agreed," Frank said. "Which brings me to my proposal." He looked at Evelyn, his expression carefully neutral. "We use Evelyn as bait. We let it leak that she'll be at a specific location at a specific time, somewhere we control, somewhere we can set a trap. Julian and his mercenaries come for her, and we eliminate the threat permanently." The room fell silent. Evelyn felt every eye turn to her, waiting for her reaction. Her first instinct was fear, the idea of being dangled as bait for the man who'd planned her murder. But underneath the fear was something else. Anger. The realization that she was tired of hiding, tired of being the victim everyone fought over. "I'll do it," she said, before anyone else could speak. "No." Dominic's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Absolutely not." Evelyn turned to face him, saw the rigid control in his posture, the dangerous stillness that meant he was barely containing his temper. "It's the smart play. You know it is. We can't stay on the defensive forever." "I said no." Dominic's gray eyes locked on hers, and she saw something she'd never expected to see from him: fear. Not for himself, but for her. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Frank interjected carefully. "Not if we want to end this quickly and decisively. Every day we wait gives them more time to plan, more opportunities to breach our security. Evelyn is what they want. We use that. Then we use a decoy," Dominic snapped. "Someone who looks like her, someone expendable." "They'll know," Camila said quietly. "Julian knows her. He'll spot a fake immediately. It has to be her, Dom." Dominic's hands clenched into fists on the table. Evelyn watched him struggle with the calculation, saw the moment when the cold strategist warred with something more human. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "I won't put her at risk. She's not expendable." "She's not," he stopped himself, jaw tight. "Find another way, Frank." "That's an order." The meeting ended shortly after, the captains filing out with careful neutrality on their faces. Frank gave Evelyn a significant look before leaving, and she understood. This conversation wasn't over, it was just postponed. When they were alone, Evelyn approached Dominic where he stood at the windows, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why won't you let me do this?" "It's the smart play. You know it is." Dominic was silent for a long moment, staring out at the lake where his security teams were still sweeping the grounds. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear him. "Because losing you would matter." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. This was supposed to be business. A transaction. You were supposed to be a means to an end. His hand reached up, almost touching her face before dropping. When did that change? Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Dominic. I won't use you as bait, he said, his voice firm again, the walls rebuilding. We'll find another way. We have to. But as Evelyn watched him leave, she realized something that both terrified and exhilarated her. Dominic Cross, the man who'd executed a traitor without hesitation, who ruled through fear and violence, had just admitted he cared whether she lived or died. And somewhere in the past few weeks, she'd started caring about him too. The question was whether that would save them both or destroy them. It took Evelyn 3 days to change Dominic's mind. 3 days of arguments, strategy sessions with Frank conducted in secret, and finally, a late-night confrontation in his office where she laid out the truth neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Julian would keep coming, keep sending mercenaries, keep escalating until someone died. Better to control when and where that confrontation happened. You want to end this, she'd said, standing across from him in the lamplight. So do I. But we can't do that hiding behind your walls. Let me help you finish it. Dominic had stared at her for a long moment, that cold calculation warring with something warmer in his gray eyes. Finally, he'd nodded once, sharp and decisive. Club Exodus. Friday night. I'm hosting a gathering of the 5 families, a quarterly meeting to discuss territory and operations. High profile enough that Julian will know you're there, controlled enough that we set the rules of engagement. Now, standing in her suite as Elena helped her into a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Evelyn tried to quiet the fear hammering in her chest. The dress was blood-red silk, cut to hug her curves and ending mid-thigh. Camila had insisted on the color, visible in a crowd, memorable, impossible to miss. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elaborate style that left her neck exposed, and the diamond necklace Dominic had given her that morning glittered at her throat. You look like a queen, Elena said quietly, stepping back to assess her work. Or a target. Both, Evelyn replied, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable from the terrified bride who'd hidden in an SUV 6 weeks ago. This woman had learned to fight, to shoot, to survive. This woman wore danger like expensive perfume. Club Exodus occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district, all industrial chic and exclusive access. Dominic's legitimate businesses provided perfect covers for his less legal operations, and the club was his crown jewel, a place where Manhattan's elite mingled with the criminal underworld, often without realizing they were dancing with both. Evelyn entered on Dominic's arm, hyper-aware of every eye that tracked their movement. He wore a black suit that made him look like death personified, and his hand on her lower back radiated possessive warning to everyone watching. Camila flanked them in tactical black disguised as clubwear, her eyes constantly scanning, while Frank coordinated security from a command center on the 3rd floor. The VIP section had been cleared for the gathering. 5 tables arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a family head and their lieutenants. Evelyn recognized some faces from Frank's briefings: the Calabrese family, the Volkov Bratva, the Chin Syndicate, the Romano clan. Old money and new blood, all bound by the same code of violence and loyalty. Dominic made introductions with casual authority, presenting Evelyn as his wife. She felt their assessment, the calculation behind every polite smile. Some saw weakness, a pretty face married for her money. Others saw something else, the way she held herself, the way she met their eyes without flinching. One woman in particular, the head of the Chin Syndicate, nodded with what looked like approval. Cross, she said in accented English. You've chosen well. Your wife has a spine. She does, Dominic agreed, his hand tightening fractionally on Evelyn's waist. Which is why she's here. The gathering proceeded with the surface civility of a business dinner and the underlying tension of enemies forced to share space. Evelyn sat beside Dominic, participating in conversations about territory disputes and profit margins as if discussing quarterly earnings rather than drug routes and protection rackets. She was learning the language, the subtle dance of respect and threat that governed this world. She was also watching the crowd below, searching for the faces Frank had burned into her memory. Julian's mercenaries would come, it was just a question of when. The attack came at midnight, when the club was at capacity and the music was loud enough to mask the sound of doors being breached. Evelyn saw them first, 3 men moving through the crowd with tactical precision, too focused, too controlled to be normal clubgoers. She touched Dominic's arm, leaned close to his ear. Northeast corner. 3 hostels. Moving toward the VIP stairs. Dominic's expression didn't change, but he keyed the microphone hidden in his cuff. Frank. Northeast stairs. Initiate protocol. Everything happened fast after that. Dominic's security moved to intercept, and the mercenaries realized they'd been spotted. One of them reached for his weapon, and suddenly the VIP section erupted into chaos. Tables overturned as family heads dove for cover, their own security teams drawing weapons. Evelyn felt Dominic's arm around her waist, pulling her down behind the heavy leather booth as gunfire shattered the careful veneer of civility. Camila was suddenly there, weapon drawn, returning fire with clinical precision. "Stay down," she shouted over the chaos. Frank's got teams converging. The bullet caught her mid-sentence, high on her left shoulder, spinning her around. She went down hard, blood spreading across her black shirt in a dark stain. Evelyn didn't think. She lunged forward, grabbing Camila and dragging her behind the overturned table, her training overriding her terror. Pressure on the wound, Camila gasped, her face pale. "Don't let me bleed out." Evelyn pressed her hands against the injury, feeling hot blood pulse between her fingers. Around them, the firefight continued, Dominic's men systematically taking down the mercenaries with overwhelming force. She heard Dominic's voice, cold and commanding, directing his teams with lethal efficiency. When the shooting finally stopped, Evelyn's hands were covered in Camila's blood, and the club floor below was littered with bodies. Dominic appeared above them, his face a mask of controlled fury as he took in his sister's injury. "Medic," he barked into his radio. "VIP section, now." His eyes met Evelyn's, and she saw something fierce and protective flash across his expression. "Are you hurt?" "No." "But Camila." "I'm fine," Camila gritted out, though her face was ashen. Flesh wound. "I've had worse." The medic arrived with a full trauma kit, immediately starting treatment while Dominic stood watch, his weapon still in hand. Below, his men were securing the scene, zip-tying the two mercenaries who'd survived. The family heads were emerging from cover, assessing damage, exchanging looks that spoke of respect hard-earned. Frank appeared, slightly out of breath, his glasses askew. 3 dead, 2 in custody. No civilian casualties. We cleared the main floor before the shooting started. Police are responding, but our contacts will handle it as a gang shooting unrelated to the club. Dominic nodded, then looked at Evelyn still kneeling beside his sister, her red dress soaked with blood. "You didn't run." "No." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "She was protecting me. I wasn't going to let her die for it." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, the last wall crumbling. He reached down, pulled Evelyn to her feet, and for the first time since their wedding, he kissed her. Not gentle, not tentative, but fierce and claiming and desperate. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. "You're mine. And I protect what's mine." Around them, his organization watched their boss claim his wife in front of the 5 families, and Evelyn understood what she'd just witnessed. This wasn't just business anymore. This was loyalty, the kind forged in blood and sealed with violence. These people would die for each other, for Dominic, and now, somehow, for her. She'd become part of the family in truth, not just in name. And as Dominic led her from the club, Camila being carried behind them on a stretcher but alive and conscious, Evelyn realized she wouldn't have it any other way. The captured mercenaries broke within hours. Frank's interrogation methods were efficient and thorough, and by dawn they had an address, a warehouse in Red Hook where Julian and Noah had established their command center. Dominic's intelligence team confirmed it by noon, heat signatures, vehicle registrations, electronic surveillance showing Julian's distinctive BMW parked inside. "They're cornered," Frank said, displaying satellite imagery on the screens in Dominic's office. "The mercenaries failed, their money's running out, and Noah's creditors are closing in. This is their last stand." Evelyn stood beside Dominic, staring at the warehouse schematic. Somewhere in that building were the 2 men who'd planned her murder, who'd sold her like property, who'd turned her wedding day into a nightmare. The woman who'd hidden in an SUV would have felt fear looking at those images. The woman she'd become felt only cold determination. "I'm going with you," she said, not a question. Dominic didn't argue. He simply nodded, then looked at Camila, whose arm was in a sling but who'd refused to stay behind. "We go in quiet. No unnecessary casualties. I want both of them alive for questioning." They moved at midnight, 3 vehicles full of Dominic's best men converging on the warehouse district. The building was isolated, surrounded by abandoned lots and chain-link fencing, perfect for a staging ground, terrible for defense. Dominic's team cut the power, disabled the security cameras, and breached the perimeter with practiced precision. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment. Evelyn moved behind Dominic, the weight of the gun Camila had given her solid in her grip. She'd never fired at a living person before, but 6 weeks of training had made the weapon feel like an extension of her hand. They found Noah first, in a makeshift office on the second floor. He was alone, hunched over a desk covered in empty bottles and racing forms, his face gaunt and unshaven. When Dominic's team kicked in the door, Noah looked up with the dull eyes of a man who'd already given up. Evelyn. Her name came out as a broken whisper. Oh God. Evelyn, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She stepped forward, letting him see her clearly in the harsh fluorescent light. Sorry for what, Dad? For selling me to a serial killer? For planning my murder? For destroying any chance I had at a normal life? I didn't have a choice. Noah's voice cracked. The debts, they were going to kill me. Julian offered a way out. He said it would be quick, painless, that you wouldn't suffer. How generous. Evelyn's voice was ice. Tell me everything. Every detail of the plan. Every conversation. Every moment you chose money over your daughter's life. And Noah broke. The words poured out in a desperate torrent, how Julian had approached him 6 months ago with the proposal, how they'd orchestrated the courtship to seem natural, how Julian had killed his previous wives and gotten away with it. Noah confessed to forging documents, to bribing the doctor who would have declared Evelyn mentally unstable, to planning that accident that would have ended her life 3 days after the wedding. He said it was foolproof, Noah sobbed. He said no one would ever know. The money would clear my debts, give me a fresh start. I needed it to be over. Evelyn felt Dominic's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as rage threatened to overwhelm the control she'd worked so hard to maintain. You're pathetic. You're not even a monster, you're just weak. The sound of footsteps on metal stairs interrupted them. Julian appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 remaining mercenaries, his charming smile replaced by something cold and desperate. He held a gun pointed directly at Noah's head. Let him go, Cross, Julian said, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Or I kill him right here. Go ahead. Dominic's tone was conversational. He's worthless to me. But not to her. Julian's eyes fixed on Evelyn. Still trying to save Daddy, aren't you? Still hoping there's something worth redeeming in the man who sold you for gambling money? No. Evelyn's voice was clear, certain. He's not worth saving. But you're not walking out of here either. Julian's laugh was harsh. You think Cross scares me? I've been planning this for months. I have contingencies, offshore accounts, connections you can't touch. He moved fast, swinging the gun toward Dominic. Evelyn was faster. The weeks of training with Camila, the hours on the shooting range, the muscle memory drilled into her through repetition, all of it coalesced into a single motion. She raised her weapon and fired. The shot took Julian in the chest, center mass, exactly where Camila had taught her to aim. He staggered backward, shock and rage warring on his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain. His gun clattered to the floor, and he collapsed against a shipping container, gasping. He started, but blood filled his mouth. Evelyn walked forward, standing over the man who'd planned to murder her, who'd killed 2 women before her and would have killed countless more. I'm not your victim, she said quietly. I never was. Julian's eyes went glassy, and then he was gone. The warehouse fell silent except for Noah's ragged breathing and the sound of Dominic's men securing the remaining mercenaries. Evelyn stared at the gun in her hands, at the body at her feet, and waited for the horror to hit. But all she felt was a grim satisfaction and the certain knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. Dominic's hand covered hers, gently taking the weapon. Evelyn. She looked up at him, saw understanding in his gray eyes. I killed him. Yes. To save my life. He cupped her face, his voice soft. That's what family does. We protect each other, no matter the cost. Sirens sounded in the distance, growing closer. Frank appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. NYPD is 3 minutes out. Detective Morrison is lead, he's one of ours. The scene is self-defense. Julian Crane and his mercenaries attacked, and Mrs. Cross defended herself and her husband. The evidence supports it. Dominic nodded, then looked at Noah, still slumped at the desk. And him? Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, extortion. The USB drive, the recorded confessions, the mercenary testimony, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Frank's tone was clinical. If he survives the next 24 hours. A lot of people want him dead. Noah looked at Evelyn, his face crumbling. I'm your father. You have to help me. You have to. You stopped being my father the day you sold me. Evelyn's voice was steady, final. I hope whatever conscience you have left makes every day in prison agony. The police arrived, and Dominic's machinery went into motion. Detective Morrison took statements that aligned perfectly with the evidence Frank had prepared. Julian Crane, wanted for questioning in connection with 2 suspicious deaths, had lured Evelyn Hartcross to the warehouse under false pretenses. When Dominic and his security team arrived to protect his wife, Julian and his mercenaries had opened fire. Evelyn had shot Julian in self-defense when he attempted to kill her husband. Clean. Simple. Impossible to disprove. As dawn broke over Red Hook and they finally left the warehouse, Evelyn sat in the back of Dominic's SUV and stared at her hands. The same hands that had hidden beneath a wedding dress 6 weeks ago now bore the weight of taking a life. Dominic pulled her against him, his voice rough against her hair. You did what you had to do. I know. And she did. The woman who'd fled her wedding wouldn't have survived this world. But the woman she'd become, Dominic's wife, his partner, his equal, understood that sometimes survival required blood. She'd become exactly what he'd told her she needed to be that first day at the estate, something harder, something they wouldn't see coming. And in doing so, she'd found something she'd never expected, a place where she belonged, in the arms of the most dangerous man alive. 3 months after the warehouse, Evelyn Cross stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominic's office and barely recognized the woman reflected back at her. Gone was the frightened bride who'd hidden in the back of an SUV. The woman in the glass wore power like a second skin, tailored black suit with razor-sharp lines, her auburn hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that emphasized the elegant column of her neck, eyes that had learned to see threats before they materialized. Julian Crane's death had been ruled justifiable homicide. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 previous wives dead under suspicious circumstances, a pattern of predatory behavior, a coordinated attack on Evelyn and her husband. The media had painted her as a survivor, a brave woman who defended herself and her loved ones. They had no idea how true that was, or what it had cost her to become someone who could pull a trigger without hesitation. Noah Hart was serving 25 years in a federal facility upstate. Evelyn had visited him once, 3 weeks after his sentencing, and sat across from him in the prison visiting room with the same cold detachment Dominic showed his enemies. Her father had aged a decade in those weeks, gray, hollow, broken. He'd begged for forgiveness. She'd told him she hoped he lived long enough to understand the full weight of what he'd done. She hadn't been back since. Mrs. Cross. Frank's voice interrupted her reflection. He entered the office carrying his ever-present laptop and a leather portfolio embossed with her initials. I have documents that require your signature. Evelyn turned from the window, gesturing for him to use the conference table. Over the past 3 months, Frank had become more than Dominic's strategist. He'd become her teacher, guiding her through the labyrinth of their legitimate business operations with the patience of a professor and the cunning of a chess master. The real estate portfolio first, Frank said, opening the portfolio to reveal stacks of legal documents. 6 commercial properties in Manhattan, all now held in a joint trust between you and Dominic. You're listed as co-owner and managing partner. Evelyn scanned the documents, her eyes catching on the addresses. Properties worth millions, all legally hers. And the import-export businesses? For companies, all showing impressive profits. Frank's tone held a hint of approval. Your restructuring of the shipping routes saved us approximately $2 million annually. The family heads have noticed your contributions. She'd been learning the business from the inside, not just the legitimate fronts, but the machinery beneath. The network of shipments and payments, the careful balance of legal commerce and criminal enterprise, the relationships that required constant maintenance. Camila had taught her to fight. Frank had taught her to think. Dominic had taught her to rule. There's one more. Frank produced a final document, this one edged in formal blue backing. Your trust fund. With your marriage legally established and both Noah Hart and Julian Crane no longer in the picture, you now have full access to your inheritance at age 26 rather than 30. $47 million. The money her mother had left to protect her, that had nearly gotten her killed, that had brought her to Dominic's doorstep. Evelyn looked at the document, then at Frank. Transfer 60% to the joint accounts, she said without hesitation. The remaining 40 stays in my name, but Frank, I want you to invest it in the legitimate businesses. Real estate, tech startups, anything that grows our clean portfolio. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. Dominic didn't ask you to do this. I know. Evelyn signed the documents with steady hands. But we're building something together. This is my stake in it. My choice. That evening, Dominic summoned her to the estate's private armory, a room she'd only recently been granted access to, where he kept his personal collection. He stood before the gun safe, selecting a weapon with the careful consideration of someone choosing jewelry. We have a meeting tonight, he said, turning to face her. In his hands was a sleek pistol with mother-of-pearl grips. The 5 families, plus representatives from the Bratva and the Yakuza. Territory negotiations, profit sharing, the usual politics. And you want me there? It wasn't a question. Evelyn had attended enough meetings now to understand the dynamics, the careful dance of respect and threat. I need you there. Dominic closed the distance between them, his gray eyes intense. As my wife. As my partner. As someone who has earned her place at the table. He held out the weapon. This belonged to my grandmother. She was the only woman my grandfather feared, because she understood power better than any of his soldiers. I want you to have it. Evelyn took the gun, feeling its perfect balance. The grip fit her hand as if made for it. What was her name? Isabella. They called her the Iron Rose. A rare smile touched Dominic's lips. I think she would have liked you. The meeting took place in a private room at Cross Estate, the dining room transformed into a war room where the city's most dangerous people gathered to divvy up territory and settle disputes. Evelyn entered beside Dominic, wearing a black dress that hugged her curves and her mother's diamond necklace, the one she'd been holding the day her life changed. But it was the wedding ring on her left hand that drew eyes, the platinum band that no longer symbolized a business transaction but something far more binding. She took her seat at Dominic's right hand, across from the Calabrese family head and beside the Chin syndicate representative. The Romano clan leader, an older man with scars mapping his face, stared at her with undisguised skepticism. Cross, he said, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. Since when do we bring wives to family business? The room went silent. Evelyn felt every eye turn to her, calculating, judging, waiting to see how she'd respond to the challenge. But before she could speak, Dominic's hand covered hers on the table, a gesture of unity that spoke volumes. She's not just my wife, Dominic said, his voice carrying absolute authority. She's my partner. She co-owns my businesses, manages my real estate portfolio, and has earned the respect of everyone at this table through her actions. His gaze swept the room, cold and unyielding. She's untouchable. Anyone who forgets that answers to me. The Romano leader held Dominic's stare for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Understood. The meeting proceeded, and Evelyn participated with the confidence of someone who belonged. She negotiated shipping routes, proposed profit-sharing arrangements, mediated a dispute between the Volkov Bratva and the Chin syndicate with diplomatic precision that had Frank nodding in approval. When the Chin representative complimented her strategic thinking, she smiled, not the scared smile of a woman seeking approval, but the assured expression of someone who knew her worth. As the meeting concluded and the families departed, Evelyn stood beside Dominic at the window, watching their guests' vehicles disappear down the long driveway. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, and she leaned into him with the ease of genuine intimacy. 3 months ago, you could barely look at me without flinching, Dominic murmured against her hair. Now you negotiate with the heads of the 5 families like you were born to it. 3 months ago, I was running from my own murder. Evelyn turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. You saved my life. You gave me power. You made me dangerous. You made yourself dangerous. His lips brushed hers, gentle despite the violence they both carried. I just gave you the tools. Evelyn kissed him properly, deep and claiming, tasting the future they were building together. When she pulled back, she touched her mother's necklace, the diamonds that had witnessed her transformation from victim to survivor to something far more formidable. Her mother had established the trust fund to protect her, but Suzanne Hart had understood something Evelyn was only now beginning to grasp. True protection didn't come from hiding from the world's darkness. It came from learning to wield that darkness yourself, from becoming someone so powerful that threats dissolved before they could materialize. Evelyn Cross was no longer the prey. She was the predator's equal, his partner, his queen. And as she stood in the arms of the most dangerous man alive, wearing a wedding ring that now meant everything, she finally understood what survival really meant. Not safety from the world, but the power to survive it on her own terms.